Okay, let me share over to here. So I'll show you how we end up getting doing our local development with that. So the LRN web components mono repo, right? This has all of our web components, like 200 some odd. So you're gonna git clone that and then do yarn install. And then when I stop derailing Nikki from other things, she can actually get all the storybook stuff in there, but it is actually working in there now. So you could technically run yarn start and see it, but hacks won't be in there. So the way that you end up working on hacks is, so after you've done the yarn install at this level, then you go into cd elements / and you can go to h-a-x, and then usually what I do is I'll do like code period here. So I open up to that window, and then I do yarn start. And so yarn start is going to open up just a little server here running. And particularly with hacks, the first, there we go. Once you see this big hideous picture of this person show up, then you know that it's fully working. I usually with hacks, because it is so complex, and what it's doing is this little service is compiling this in real time. So I usually wait until it stops spinning, especially knowing what your machine is read, that would be ideal. But there we go. So usually after the first time, right? Okay, there we go. Now it's reloading fast. Because it has to go out and get all the definitions and cache them, basically, in case you end up using them. So then I hit edit and work on whatever. Cool. The way it's loading this in though is so in the demo directory, there's index.html. We can see that it's got some minor dependencies, like just for local development, and then it references the HAX tag, and then the HAX tag just has whatever content inside of it. But the hacks tag gets its instructions as to how to operate from this App Store setting. And so App Store is a setting in hacks that says, hey, where do I get all of my directions? So like hacks literally, if you didn't give it an App Store, in fact, I'll take it out. You can see, if you don't give it an App Store, it basically, probably have to refresh this, yeah. It basically goes, I mean, I know how to load, and that stuff looks like HTML. So like it knows how to modify these paragraphs, and that's a list or whatever. But you see it's severely limited. It didn't even load the other stuff in place. And it's probably not, beyond super glitchy without an app store, because I don't really test for that. So the app store is a JSON blob, and we can see it in the network inspector. So the network inspector, and then XHR, and then we'll hit refresh. You can see it calls out to appstore.json. So appstore.json ends up having four categories here, two of which we'll probably get at least consolidate or something soon. But so it's got apps, and apps is how you've got these little search widgets, basically. So all of these are the apps, if you will. It's kind of the what's able to drive this behind the scenes searching. Also, in a real content management system, it's what drives this upload to actually go somewhere. So all of the details of how to build, say, like the YouTube form, come at runtime from this setting. And that's why it has the word search there, versus if I go to like NASA, it says search, versus there we go, Jiffy has multiples, right? So it has rating and it has language that are also there. The most important piece of this, especially from local development standpoint, is this autoloader section. So autoloader is the piece that's going to say, whenever this sets up, hey, I need you to import these other elements, because they're the elements that we're going to allow to be in the body area here. So whenever we want to work on one of these, like let's say that there's something screwed up with Wikipedia query, and this is actually a process thing I went through with Andrew the other day, because it does take some getting used to. So I had a Wikipedia query, and then maybe I go like, oh shoot, that's not right. So I'd look and see, well, I know where Wikipedia query is. It's in our own mono repo here. But so maybe the configuration tab, I don't like that this says search term. So I'll leave that running, open another terminal window, and I'll go to Wikipedia query, and then I will do a code on that one. And all of our, and generally with like front-end assets, you work on like out of whatever the SRC directory is for the most part. So I'm going to do a yarn start on Wikipedia query, right? So this is me working on hacks, but also working on this element. So I can pull up Wikipedia query, look at it and say, okay, it has search, and see what the different attributes are. Then in Wikipedia query, I can scroll down and we have there it is, static get hacks properties. So this is the piece that bridges between any front-end asset and the hacks editor. So if a hacks editor is told to load it via these directions that come in at runtime, right? And it has this function on it, then it will use this information, and if you're following the API, then it'll build that form. So Gizmo is how it presents itself on the screen. That's why you get Wikipedia article with a little icon of a book. There's some other metadata in there. But then this is the form. So actually the most recent revision that we did of the UI has, at the moment at least, just gotten rid of quick. There's no quick editing setting yet. We might bring that back, but we'll see. So what I'll do is, just for the simplicity of this one, I'll add the hide title flag, because we used to have hide title and then you could actually do it in context, and it went away. So I'm going to put hide title back in, and instead of search term, this is going to be like article name, because that's basically what it is. You're not really searching Wikipedia when you have to put in a highly specific name in order to get a result, in my opinion. So then I'll save. So I saved that over in this window, right? And now when we refresh my little hacks instance and we search for Wikipedia query, we have hide title flag there, as well as it's saying article name, so I can search for Drupal. And now it's correctly influencing the hide title piece. Hey, Nikki, look, it's your checkbox thing that you just fixed right before this call.
Yeah. Because I'm your best friend in the whole wide world.
You are my BFF. However, look at it. It appears.
Shh, it's a good thing Becca's not on here.
It appears that this is, it's misaligned. Like, I don't even, why do we even use this system? But, so did that make sense, Reed, as far as like the way that we end up working on these elements locally?
Yeah. I just had no idea really. We'd never talked about it, so.
That's the purpose of these calls, now, isn't it? Does anybody have any questions surrounding any of this stuff before I show the autoloader thing that I'm going to be celebrating about, that I got it working right before this call and spent the entire week on? All righty. So let's get rid of these things. Close that. All right. Then, and this is always important, make sure you turn off those stray node processes running in the background infinitely. So I don't have that Wikipedia query change. This is actually a perfect segue. I don't have that Wikipedia query change up at hacks.psu.edu or anywhere else in the universe. So I'm going to show a little bit of what that process ends up looking like, and why I'm freaking out about, well, two things. One was when I achieved what I consider pipeline unification, which to me basically just means we have one place that we work on all our stuff. I run one script, and then I can push it out the door everywhere, and it works everywhere. So that means that we got, it's basically a build routine, like the pipeline and workflow that you use. So for example, I mentioned we just pulled in some functionality from Nikki shortly before this call. What our workflow ends up looking like, we work in this mono repo, and So we've got this pull request, and Nikki just had this one, and I have to just put it on screen because it's just so good, of best friend status secured. And so now that we're BFFs because of this file change, right? So I can look at, Nikki's got a copy of the entire monorepo. She fixed this thing related to checkboxes that the field wasn't showing checkbox. So from that change, this is what my process is to get this out to the universe. So first I accept her PR, which I did, and then I troll her about us being BFFs. And then I do git pull after I merge it. I'm just gonna go through all the motion. Okay. Then I make my changes or whatever, much like I did here locally. I do git add A, git commit M, fixed Wikipedia. All right. We've got some minor linters, which unfortunately pretty much always always reformat something because it's reformatting like JSON. So I actually just have a shorthand here that I autocomplete. There we go. So that did git add A, git commit M, and then just put the lint up and then pushed it up to GitHub. So then if I wanted to get this out for other people's consumption, and I'm not going to do this right at the moment, then I would we use a thing called Lerna, and I'd do Lerna publish. And Lerna publish is going to look at all the assets that have changed. It's going to see all Nikki's changes that got merged in here recently, and it's going to come back and say, hey, I'm going to update these npm repos, and it's going to loop through and basically run npm publish over and over and over again. So that gets our stuff distributed to the world so that you can run yarn at LRN web components / simple-fields and ingest Nikki's enhancement. So the way that we then populate our entire universe is that then I go over to hack CMS, and this can be run from anywhere. It's actually it's a repository that we have called unbundled builds, or unbundled web components. So while I run this from hack CMS, it's because I basically took this repo and pushed it into the hack CMS repo I work on behind the scenes. But effectively, it is a boilerplate way of doing build integrations that takes all the thinking and guesswork out of it, is what the idea is. So we worked on that locally. I worked on that Wikipedia tag. I edited it. I see it locally, but that's not it running on a live web server. So this is the steps to get there. So I have a rather ridiculous, and I'm not going to run this, but I just figure I'd show it because it's funny. Rather ridiculous little chain together in Bash that runs. So it's yarn run build, and I'll step through what that is. Then add all to get the output, then commit build up, then push it up to master, then run a thing called upcdn, which basically goes to the Penn State CDN that we recently set up, and a mirror and some other local development stuff, and basically just pushes the exact same changes there, or pulls them rather. Then I go into Elm's Learning Network, which is our other project, and then I add these assets, push them up, and then I push them to an internal Penn State mirror. So I'm very lazy. I want to just push the up key and then have all that happen, basically. However, what's going on with a build is what I think is going to fundamentally transform the way that we are able to interface with this stuff. So last week I mentioned I came up with this thing that I was like, hey, this is a neat conceptual piece. And it's the idea of doing not having an entry point. And you normally have an entry point that looks sort of like this, except it would imagine, instead of import that, it would say like // node modules or some stuff like that, right? So that is the live copy running out in the wild. And then you would include, paper button or hacks tag or Wikipedia query or anything else, but you would actually go through and you would import all of these things, and you'd have to write them in a file and understand how to do a build routine. So what this WC autoloader script is trying to do is it creates a singleton, which you can watch the thing from last week. I cleaned it up a bit, fixed some things, expanded its capabilities. But basically now this works across all polyfilled and non-poly and evergreen browsers. So through a lot of testing this week, this now is a one-size-fits-all solution for this. What it does is, yeah, I don't want to save whatever changes I just made there. What it ends up doing is it interfaces with our build routine. So when I run yarn run build, it runs Polymer build, which we use to generate and smash together our assets and compile them to work in different platforms, which Polymer build has its own little configuration file, which don't need to go into super detail on, but it basically says, hey, spider through this file, additionally add in these dependencies, and then you have outputs. So this is going to output what it finds to a directory called ES6, and it's going to use these criteria. So it's going to transform this one statement. It's not going to minify things, and it's going to make sure that it works with, in this case, ES modules and ES 2017, which is commonly known as ES8. So even though I call it ES6, we're going to ignore that. I've mentioned before why I do that. It's basically ES6 plus at this point. But so then I make two other builds. One build that has to do with ES6 browsers and AMD module packaging, which I'm not going to get into, but there's basically different ways you can teach the web page how to find other JavaScript code and get all of it to work in a modular way. So I compile it to ES6 and to ES5 because there's some older browsers you need to hit with that. So basically the settings in here should work with anything. So Polymer is going to go through, use those settings, find all the files, make all the paths work, and then we're going to run Terser here, which uses gulp. So in my gulp file, Terser is just a nice thing that is able to basically minify the file a little bit further. So it's going to minify the ES6 copy, which is the evergreen copy. So this file structure and what goes out the door is going to be the thing that hits like 90+% of traffic. Those other two steps, and honestly, I spent probably the last 3 days in just dealing with dependency issues surrounding these fallbacks. So modern web is phenomenal, but like yesterweb, which is really only like 3 years ago, is just awful to interface with. But in order for that auto-loading script to work, it needs to find a file that basically has a registry. So what a registry looks like, from my definition, is the name of the tag, and then, you know, if you were to access that as an object, where that tag lives. So what we've done with the unbundled build stuff is that using this script that, thank you, Potter, for writing the vast majority of, because he's way better at Node than I am. I just cleaned some stuff up. It's going to look through the compiled ES6 code and sniff out things that say custom elements.define or static get tag or static get is, which is another popular convention. And it even has fallback support for finding Polymer legacy elements, which are very old ones that we still use occasionally. So what it's doing through all of this mess is basically just sniffing out web components and then finding the file that web component lived in this case, this F location thing, and associating it to the tag that it found. Then it writes all that to wcregistry.json. So no matter what components we add going forward, this workflow will figure out what they are. When Nikki adds 10 more awesome web components tomorrow and I accept them and then I run a new build, they will just magically be available through this script. So this is monstrous, as you can see. This is every web component that this sniffed out and found. It found Polymer elements, it found R elements, it found VAD, and it found local time, which is by GitHub. It finds anything that's a web component in that tree successfully and builds this little registry. The amazing thing about this file is that compressed like this and sent over the wire, it's 1K. So 1K for what I'm about to show you. So what it is I have this issue I've been tracking all week and going through and finding the issues and resolving them. And I'm waiting for this moment so that I can click this checkbox. It says solve the biggest problem with adoption of web components so we can scale out the roof. So I'm going to check it and say that this is now working because I got it working like 5 minutes before we started recording. So what it is, and it's now, it's in production environment, so I'm going to show you it. So I'll hit refresh, and this loaded. What's actually happening though is it's using that script and it's hitting WC registry, and then off of WC registry it knows all the tags in the page and where they actually come from. So then by knowing where everything comes from, sorry, I got wrong window open here. By knowing what the registry is and what those element definitions are, we are able to, there we go, I stopped my video, thanks, Butter. By knowing what those element definitions are, if we add the autoloader to the page, the autoloader will just figure out everything in the DOM that needs a definition imported, get it from this file, and just unpack it, and it'll work. So this page at the bottom, whoops, if I do view source, all the way to the bottom, it points to this build.js file, which is literally just the file you're seeing that I'm showing locally. So this build.js file with this registry, with the build routine that I can now just run a script and it goes, can be served anywhere and just work. So for example, this is now running on hacks.phj.edu. So for my course, it's going to actually find the tags that aren't defined and then load the definitions incredibly fast. It also is now doing this on demand. So if you notice a second ago that, Jim wasn't there and then he showed up, and now when I go back and forth, Jim's just there. It's because that element definition was brought in, and there's another example, was brought in as it was used. So if I go to network and I do JS and we just click through, there we go. LRN design block quote was detected as being added to the DOM. And so it checked against that registry, found the definition, and then just imported it. And so anything that is not known, hey, there's a video player on that page back there, just starts to work. So the exact same approach for me to teach Hack CMS how to set up and work is the approach that is in this is Elms LN running here, is the same approach that works in this code pen that I'll throw in the chat in case anybody wants to play with it. So this code pen, the only thing going on here is if you look at settings, whoops, if I look at settings and then HTML, there's this copy and paste effectively. And I will copy and paste it into a new window here so you can see it, but it's pretty minimal. We establish where the CDN is going to be pointing to for our assets. There's a flag for forcibly redirecting people to say like, hey, you got to upgrade your browser for things like IE11. And then there is the reference to the entry point, which is that build.js file. So this is already running on Penn State CDN, which is what that code pen is pointing to, right? But it's just the same exact file you saw before. So in this code pen now, and we can do the same inspection thing, effectively, if you know the names of elements, so like if I know that Wikipedia query is a tag that we use, I can take it out of the page and we'll see this open up. And it has some fields here, but paper text area, paper button, if I were to write, paper input or simple fields, I could do simple fields, field. Nikki, how's the API for this work? Type. So text. There we go. So that added simple fields field, and now the definition's there. And you can see I can get rid of that text area to prove it's not the same one as that one. The buttons are there as a result of it loading and finding them. If I were to throw that Wikipedia tag back in, or much like last week, where I inspect the element here, there we go. All right, we go to simple fields field, and then I'm going to take body, edit, and we're going to throw in Wikipedia query. It added Wikipedia query right there because I just opened the DOM and added it. So these tags are imported dynamically. The entire pipeline is in place in such a way that we can just start throwing more and more elements into this. Other people can set up their own CDNs that leverage this. I just got the fallback working right before this, so I was having issues with like some of these middle of the road versions of Firefox and Safari, which now work. So let's see if this opens up the right window in browser stack. It's thinking about it. It might get mad about recording a screen that it's giving me a recording of the screen on. So this is that STEM research ethics site, polyfilled. So Firefox 63, which I believe I picked, that should be serving the ES6-AMD build of the site. And you see the site. Versus if I were to switch to Safari 10 is notoriously difficult for me to get working. But if I were to switch to Safari 10, it should open still unless I bricked it in the last, half hour. Hey, there we go. Safari 10 working. IE 11 was not working when I went to it, but I also don't support it. So, and then this is the old version of Edge, which also was working, at least when I loaded it up quickly. So really, those are like your three biggies that you have to worry about at all that are not evergreen. Evergreens, this stuff just works, and you don't have to think about it. So, just thinking about it. There we go. Let's say it's very, very slow to use Edge, as you can see. Granted, it's also, screen recorder showing an emulated copy of Edge running and then streaming the screen over to me. But, if you hit it in the older version of Edge that's now, 6 months old or whatever, just works. Oh, Mike pasted in the chat a cool tag. Yeah, that is a good one. So let me show that one too. So this is the LRN Markdown Editor tag, which is something we made for the studio. So this gives you split or preview, and split view is really cool because you can just do things and stuff whatever you want. I also think we have a tag called MD block. Let me check real quick. MD block, yeah. And I believe mdblock.js is a marked element. It takes source. That's right. I thought it did. Okay. So let me close. Oops. Close just that file. MD block lets you remote load markdown files, and it presents them in place. So I can do MD block source equals, and now I'm gonna have to go find a find a markdown file. So IST402 definitely has some somewhere. I think I have them under files.md. Glossary.md. That's right, because we, as a class, we made a glossary this semester. So then I can point to that glossary, throw it in here as source, and do -md block. And now that article is displayed somewhere else. So the reason, if it's not apparent, the reason why I think this is such a big deal is literally any system on earth you can now copy and paste a single line of code into, and that MD block will work. That maybe if it's already running an existing web component based app, you could have some conflicts pop up. So I would preface that There are some buts, but this could work in any content management system currently running at the university, whether or not it's made with the best conventions in place or not. Any asset that you funnel up there, as long as you communicate what those assets are, which is part of what Nikki's working on with the storybook stuff, then you're basically opening up the universe of web components to people that don't have to understand anything about them other than that, hey, MD block looks cool. I want to copy and paste that and use it the way I use paragraph tags.
Could you use multiple build.js's?
Like how so?
So you're identifying your monorepo. What if your monorepo doesn't have a component that you want to use, and you want to use another monorepo for some other component?
That is a good question. Let me see. I swear I made a little picture theoretically demonstrating this. Yes, CDN workflow, there it is. So this is what I'm thinking specifically on that, because I posted it on Twitter the other day. So for one, if you have control over a monorepo, then you can just pull in whatever elements you want. So at that point, you're kind of in control of your own universe, right? Now, if you're saying, hey, I work in central IT or something, and we want to use the PSU logo and we want to use Wikipedia query, but they don't live on the same CDN and we don't understand enough about how this works, but yet we still want to use it, which again, like I think that is a bit of a context that's not going to happen. But if that were to happen, there's a deduping script that I've written in the past that technically you should be able to do a similar pattern. Now we would have to have the WC autoloader script would need to understand how to, it would basically just be, instead of connecting to one source, it would be past an array. And then if that array is just one thing, well, then it only loads one thing. So it would be possible in that regard. I would also be curious to see, because I haven't tried this yet, if the WC registry.json file just had the CDN references directly populated in it, or said these things live on this CDN, if it wouldn't be able to import them remotely on the fly. I don't know if there's a real use case for that, but I did want to make, just the silly little picture to indicate that it is something I've at least been thinking about contextually.
This is incredible. This is magic.
It's a little magic.
Did you see that? Good magic.
There's a video from last week on how that script actually works. But it basically just does a document.select query select all star, and then if things that come up in the query selector have a hyphen in them and they aren't yet defined, then it uses that registry and does a dynamic import.
Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
So, sorry.
Two things immediately come to mind: webcomponents.org and the Web Components Analyzer. If you make a pull request into Web Components Analyzer, that automatically is creating a JSON object for every web component that's created. If you have a Web Components Analyzer running for your web components in order to create that storybook knobs thing, that could generate the necessary information that you need to add it to your list of your build.js file. And the second thing is webcomponents.org already exists as a domain with people that we are able to talk to at any given point in time that you can register elements with. Could there be a shared build.js file containing all of the, maybe not the build.js file, but containing every web component that has been registered on webcomponents.org? So anyone, anywhere who publishes a web component to anything has like a 1 kilobyte, maybe 2 kilobyte files that that's literally every web component's ever been registered.
So the nice thing is that the build.js file, which is the entryway, never has to actually change. That was how we were doing it before, was kind of like, hey, let's build this file and then that'll be our entry point.
Okay.
So as long the entry point actually ends up being the same no matter what elements are on the other end, because all this does is tee up a link to the registry.json file.
Yep.
Then this is the detection for evergreen, effectively loading autoloader. If you need the polyfill, and this is what I was killing myself over, it loads up this legacy file, which then does additional tests and adds additional polyfills and fail safes to attempt to make that load. But yeah, if we could have a registry like that, that's sort of somewhere between like pika.dev is trying to do something kind of in this universe, if you will, so that I could search on pika.dev for like LRN web components /HAX. And it's going to say, hey, here's this tag, and it's going to give you a little bit of like ways you could use it. But if you see the way they have their import, right? So if we had a unified way of doing that, that would be huge. The other thing is there is the analyzer script. There's a competing format that will win out eventually that we're starting to peg stuff to. So our elements will generate, there it is, custom -elements.json. And so you see right off the bat, version experimental. Like this hasn't solidified yet, but it's kind of the next generation version of the analyzer script you're referring to. That I forget who's working on it, but Microsoft at one point, the VS Code editor, there's a way you can make it detect this. And then if it exists, it'll allow you to do autocompletes against the tag names because it knows, yeah. So that stuff is just on the horizon. I think, you're probably looking at about 6 months out for that piece to get picked up and worked on by a few more people to be able to push it over the goal line, I hope. Or at least be able to have it and they like, hey, run these 3 things and now you can do autocompletes with these.
And the other comment I had would also make demoing and creating a demo site just similar to Storybook, like almost trivial.
Yeah.
Every list of you can switch to a demo version of whatever site you're looking at that has the elements that are on that page in like a tab list on the left, and then just the right is just that element in whatever it was showing up as. You can have like a demo or a debug version of just the web components from whatever page you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll be absolutely insane from an adoption standpoint because of that. Because you could also take the tabs and have like we add a tab that instead of next to the knobs, it says like how to use this, and literally just paste the same thing every time and then put the element under it and remix it based on the knobs, and someone can copy and paste it and it works.
This is awesome.
So, all right. Anybody have any other questions or things they want to talk about? That is insane. And then I'll forget about it because now it works, Mike. And now we'll never talk about it again. And it'll just be, oh yeah, we do the da-da-da thing. Because I don't want to think about it. I'm so lazy. I just want it to work. I just want web components to work and not have to think ever again.
Well, it's a good thing we record these then, so you can go back in 3 weeks and remind yourself.
I'll remind myself, yeah. So that is pushed out into production. I need to do some additional testing, obviously, but we're planning to roll that into production for our online course portfolio at large, hopefully next week. It's pretty much the way that it's working now, but I need to dot a few I's type of thing. So anybody have anything else they wanted to talk about or questions they had? If not, we can cut here. All right. So thank you all again for jumping on with us. Good conversation as always. If you want to learn more about what we're doing, our project is ElmsLN on basically everywhere, whether that's Twitter or on Slack, the group is ElmsLN, or on YouTube, it's ElmsLN, or github.com/ElmsLN, where you can find out more about that. These little video series will keep putting them out there. You're always welcome to join if you want. So Tom, thank you for getting those other ones out there. Tom is the unsung hero, so now he is sung via this. But have a great weekend. See you next week, friends.